Everybody was older. We grew up around a lot of old people, and there was a lot of stories, things that had happened in the family. Uh, and they say, no, son. Uh, and I heard all of these stories, and they interested me to no end. My family, there was a lot of history in my family. I never got to meet my grandfather, but people talked about him a lot. He had bought the place where we live when he was a young man, and he worked hard to pay for it. He built the cabin, the house that we live in, the log cabin. He hewed the logs out and built it totally by hand. There's still clay and hog hair between the logs. And there was a lot of talk about him. His name was Reuben. And when he was born, his father was 70 years old. 11 months later, there was another son born, and they gave him to the oldest daughter to raise. She'd been married a number of years and didn't have children. So they gave him to the oldest daughter to raise, and his sister and her husband raised him. And it was not far from where our home is, a piece of land not far from there. And his sister, they called her Sis. Her right name was Mary Isabella, and her husband's name was Adolphus Cave, and they called him Uncle Dolph. Well, Aunt Sis and Uncle Dolph never had any children. They lived on a little one-room log cabin that a farmer out in the valley owned. He had a big piece of land back in the mountains, and he kept cattle on there and kept the land for pasture. And Aunt Sis and Uncle Dolph just lived there. They took care of the place for him. They didn't pay rent or anything. They just lived there and took care of things. Aunt Sis and Uncle Dolph was people that everybody talked about a lot. Granddad, of course, having been raised by them. Some of the stories that they told, Aunt Sis loved cats. She had so many cats. She had a hole cut in her front door down at the bottom, a little square hole. And the cats could go in and out of the house as they pleased. And Dad said, if you went up there and the cats heard you coming, they'd all make a dive for that hole at the same time. And they'd all be fighting and squalling, trying to get out the door at the same time. And he said it was really funny. Aunt Sis once raised a pig. An uncle of hers, an old fella that had a hog that had a litter of pigs, the runt he brought up and gave to Aunt Sis. And it was in the spring, March or April, and Aunt Sis took the pig and she raised it and made a pet out of it. She kept him in the house. He went in and out of the house as he pleased, and he got to be a big hog. And that fall, he was getting too big for him to do anything with, and it came time for him to go the way of all hogs back then. And when the sad day arrived, Aunt Sis refused to have anything to do with it. She sat in the house by the fireplace. Granddad came up to help butcher the hog, and he came up before daylight, of course, and they got the water heated. And when it got light enough to see to shoot him, as he went out the door to shoot the hog and butcher him, Aunt Sis said, "Kill him easy, Rube, please." You know, that one of the stories I remember him telling so much. And they were ready. Things like that, you know, where they lived, they never had anything, never had much. They went picking berries one day. Aunt Sis and Uncle Dolph and Granddad and Grandmom, and Dad was a little boy. He went with them, and there was a couple other people, and they went back up one of the hollows, and some of the boys had ran ahead and they had found a rattlesnake, and they hollered back that there was a rattlesnake. And Aunt Sis and Uncle Dolph had been walking side by side, and Uncle Dolph was just a little bit in front. And Dad heard Uncle Dolph say, "Sis, let's get out of here." And Dolph turned around to look back, and Aunt Sis was already way down the path. The minute they said snake, she had flown. That was always a cute story. Back during the Depression, when the park here was being founded, there was a lot of things that were going on, things that happened that in some ways were sad. There was a family that lived down here in the Laurel, Madison County, a place called the Laurel down there. And they had a number of children. It was in the 30s, right about the time they were all moved out of the park. And it was in the middle of the winter, and there was a lot of snow on the ground. It was cold, it was miserable, and they ran out of food.